What's up, everybody? It's Saul, and today I'm here with Scythia, lead portrait and community moderator for Princes of Darkness, a real-life vampire who also just happens to be a developer for the Princes of Darkness mod. How are you this morning, Scythia?
Doing quite all right. Hopefully you're doing well as well.
I am. I noticed that you, it looks like you fed recently. How was that?
Just a wonderful pork dinner. Luckily, the taste can be quite refined if you pick the right one.
Of course. So today we're going to talk a bit about the upcoming Blood and Silk update, which you are having. You have a pretty big role in that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we begin talking about Blood and Silk in general?
Yes, I'd love to. Specifically, with Prince of Darkness, given that we use the basic Crusader Kings 3 map, typically we tend to have, as far as maps go, a significantly lighter workload than a lot of other total conversion mods have. Although the All Under Heaven expansion is a really big, it's going to be a watershed moment for us. So specifically, it's become an all hands on deck thing for the dev team, and specifically I, as alongside our senior developer Card, have been at the forefront of that, specifically making it so that way it won't just be an expansion of the map with a bunch of random characters, but rather something that fits the setting and is also fun to play in. We're trying to merge those two as best we can, and we have quite the content direction for it, mainly with the native supernaturals of East Asia, the Hungry Dead, also known as the Wengkui, or later in modernity under the anachronistic title Equation. But then otherwise, we also have K-Knights in East Asia that we are brought back from the older editions of the World of Darkness to bring to the light of the moon once more.
Okay. So when it comes to, because obviously during the ModCon presentation, y'all talked about how you've been going through like old source material and old lore books, just trying to like piece things together. How has that been as a team? Because I know before this conversation, you said you were like probably the number 3 like lore person on the team as far as like knowing like what's in the background. Because World of Darkness, obviously, it's been around for decades, so there's a lot to consume. So how have you been going about that exactly?
Specifically, I have been going alongside Card. He's the specific, I consider him probably one of the greatest experts on the setting that I've ever met. We both have done full rereads of the Kindred of the East game line, which primarily deals with East Asia, so it's the most relevant for us. So we've done full rereads of that, as well as also from first and second edition of World of Darkness. They had these books just were titled The World of Darkness that detail the setting further, and specifically we have read those. So specifically we have gone across first and second edition World of Darkness alongside the Kindred of the East game lines, specifically looking into the finer details and trying to figure out how best to fill out the setting, because probably our greatest issue with going forward with this is that we really don't have all that many characters relevant to this time period. So we've been having to fill in the spaces, but also making sure it still fits the setting. Because previously, like in sub-Saharan Africa or the steppes, we've typically done random characters,
Mm-hmm.
where we specifically have just filler characters to help take over duchies. That way there's actually landing there. Although with an expansion as big as East Asia, we didn't want to do that. So that's why we went into these really old game books. Specifically, like we've created entire bloodlines out of small offhand mentions from second edition books that are older than I am, or in specifically one book, Vancouver by Night had a lineage of Japanese vampires that we've decided to fully bloom into their own unique bloodline.
Oh, that's awesome.
And specifically taking these minor forgotten footnotes and elevating them into something special.
Mm-hmm.
That has been our focus, specifically by looking at these older, more forgotten world building books and using Kindred of the East as a primary foundation for it, and then making sure everything fits in properly.
Oh, that sounds like quite a challenge, but that can be kind of exciting too, because you could sort of, I'm sure, like when you found this, these Japanese vampires in this random book, like mentioned, you were probably like, oh my god, we could use this, and that's sort of gratifying in a way, because you're having to put in all this work to fill in. I mean, arguably one of the biggest expansions Paradox has ever done, because I mean, it's just a huge
Absolutely.
amount of land to fill. So I can't even imagine, because it's a lot. I mean, there's already a lot to fill in just general Europe, Africa, and then the Near East. So I give my props to you. And I wanted to talk a bit about just in general because we have a few questions that we talked about that we would discuss. Big overview. What kind of content can we expect in the Blood and Silk East Asia expansion for Princes of Darkness?
Absolutely. The big one is obviously going to be the centerpiece supernaturals in East Asia, the Hungry Dead. Specifically, they've already had an overhaul on our dev build, and they have another overhaul upcoming. Specifically, this will be their third rework because with an expansion this big, they are going to be the centerpiece of the entirety of East Asia. So we want to get them right. So specifically, with reworking their progression, because specifically the vampires of East Asia don't have generation. Rather, their spiritual enlightenment determines their power, referred to in game and in the books as Dharma. Specifically, we have reworked their Dharma system and their powers. We have specifically looked in and expanded their faith system. So that way, the 5 primary faiths and the numerous offshoot branches are all perfectly represented within the mod. And those faiths actually do determine what progresses you further along your enlightenment and what boosts your powers and how their powers interconnect to that. Because unlike the typical vampires that players usually play with in Prince of Darkness, K-Knights, the Hungry Dead specifically focus more on meditation, breathing in energy, and specifically because one of the main ways they feed is they actually drink breath, kind of like a Jiangshi.
Oh
And
wow.
specifically, they're also a lot more oriented on the mortals around them. They like to build cults. They like to surround themselves with that. And specifically, they are a lot more realm oriented than vampires typically are, and less focused on herding. Specifically, it's the idea of they're cultivators in a way. So specifically, in making that kind of um, sword fantasy aesthetic
Hmm.
actually brought into closer to actual sword fantasy tropes and writings, and then specifically making it so that way they have a more interesting gameplay loop than regular vampires do. Because, like, specifically, the biggest thing is that they don't have a herd,
Hmm.
but then at the same time, they are quite realm and domicile focused. So specifically, your realm itself is far more important. And as they can't embrace people, they have to either find people that recently escaped hell, because that's actually where they come from, is that they are sinners who have escaped hell. They either have to find them or they have to have their own semi-supernatural children, which are called Dhampir with a Y. But then otherwise, it's a different gameplay loop than typically finding a great mortal and embracing them and having a herd. And rather, it's about building your domain, making yourself powerful, and then ultimately becoming this beautiful monster of enlightenment.
Interesting. Okay, so when you say escape hell, how does one go about escaping from hell?
Um, it depends on the hell, because there's actually thousands of hells. That's actually the name of a game book. But specifically, to go to hell, you either have to commit some egregious sin. Like, for example, the Hell of the Night Realm is specifically for those who ultimately hide and use honor as cover for their wickedness, or the Hell of Being Skinned Alive, which is specifically for the people who take from others. The Demon City, which is for those who live by violence. The Hell of Salt and Iron, those who rule by abuse of a particularly more grisly manner, or the Hell of Burrowing Maggots, which is by making people sick, or you just happen to die by one of those means. So, for example, if you drown, you could just end up in the Hell of Boiling Seas for no other reason than you drowned. Or if you die a really confusing death, you can end up in the Hell of Upside Down Sinners, which everything is inverted. And then escaping Hell, that's basically a story every Hungry Dead has that's their own.
Okay.
Specifically in Princes of Darkness, that's not necessarily something that the player will do, but rather it is more so the basis of that is the one shared element that drives them all. They are all people that had the not only just the wit to escape hell, but the will to escape hell. Because that one of the main ways you can recruit new Hungry Dead is specifically through a court position called an infant devil civilizer, whose main goal is finding recent escapees from hell, feeding them back into sense, and then bringing them to your court to then properly educate them.
Oh my god, that sounds great. So I guess a question that I have, just like spawning from this, with it sounds like the East Asian vampires are going to have like kind of their own really interesting gameplay mechanics. How does the team plan on like balancing that with like the older vampires, or is it just going to be like just like an addition, like another like interesting thing that you can do, sort of deal, like how there's different splats.
Specifically, they are a different splat. So
Okay.
they will actually have their own tolerances with vampires. They'll have their own tolerances with werewolves. They will have their own tolerances with other shapeshifters, mages, when they eventually come, so on and so forth. The Hungry Dead, they're vampire adjacent, but they're also kind of similar to demons. They're also kind of similar to wraiths. They're their own thing, so we have made them their own thing because a long time ago they did just used to be a type of vampire
Hmm.
within modding, but now they actually, if you look at the splat map, you will see that they are their own splat, and they have been for a while now, but we've specifically been working on giving them greater depth. And because initially they weren't necessarily the easiest thing to understand, they were quite easy to exploit. So we've since cut back on that to make a more interesting, dynamic, and fun gameplay loop for them.
Interesting. Okay. So as far as realms go, we've talked a little bit about how there's a few different ones. So like, what can we expect as far as the realm types? Because it sounds like there's more than one variety of honestly new splats. It sounds like there's a lot of new things to expect. Anyway.
Yes, specifically it's obviously because we don't know how hegemonies are exactly going to work yet. We don't necessarily have a perfect idea for what they're going to be, but the idea is that East Asia is going to be roughly, at least within the World of Darkness, split between five major hegemonies,
Okay.
which is specifically in the north, there is the steppe of the Black Tortoise Court. In the south, specifically in Southeast Asia, Indochina, Nusantara, Malaysia, the Philippines, is under the Scarlet Phoenix Court. The major Tibet regions and entrance and India is under the White Tiger Court, as it's called. Um, Japan and Korea are under the Azure Dragon Court hegemony title, and then the bulk of China will be under the Yellow Emperor Court, and those are specifically from the setting. Those are the exact terms that is actually how East Asia's night world was divided in the 1100s within the World of Darkness. However, that's just the hegemony title that's supposed to be there.
Hmm.
The reality of the situation is obviously a lot messier. Like, specifically, India basically is a free for all between the native Ravnos kindred and the Hungry Dead that are there, specifically the Infinite Thunder Courts, the Mahadivya Courts, and the Celestial Tribe.
Hmm.
Those are three heretical courts. Heretical and Orthodox courts are a division between the Hungry Dead. Specifically, the Orthodox courts are the main branch that define them, where the heretical courts are offshoots. And in India, the heretical courts are far more present because they're far more removed from their central power bases in China. Tibet is actually specifically going to be divided between three major players who are fighting over the remains after the previous ancestor just retired. The
Okay.
black the Black Tortoise Court is unfortunately being played basketball with by the Mongolian Anda and being destroyed by the Gangrel there. But then also, one great overlying threat is a group of Hungry Dead called the Akuma. They are specifically also known as Defiled. They are Hungry Dead that, after escaping Hell, decided to go back to it and swear themselves to the Lords of Hell, the Devil Kings, or the Yama Kings. We hope they will eventually be playable and when All Under Heaven come out. But however, until then, they are basically the Infernalists. However, because every Hungry Dead comes from Hell, they're a lot more common. And specifically, they play into the central conflict of Hell is trying to usurp God and place their own god, the Demon Emperor, on the throne. Every Devil King wants that chair, so they're having their Akuma try to make the world worse to bring that horrible day closer. So that is the main enemy of the courts,
Oh my.
and they are corrupting everyone.
Oh my God. So, oh, well, okay. So the I guess the overarching, are there like several different overarching I guess like goals or like events that you're trying to achieve like with these different hegemonies or like different splats? It sounds like
Yes,
for the Hungry Dead that they want to do what you just said, which sounds insane. Um is that going to be
yeah,
something
it's like
that's going to go into the mod like when this DLC comes out and when the mod like this update comes out? Is that going to be like a goal of people who are playing as the Hungry Dead to do?
yes. Specifically, we already actually kind of already have a mechanic already in. It's called the Wheel of Ages. Specifically, the world as it will start in game will be in the fourth age, and specifically, as more Infernalists come up, more devils are about. The world will advance closer to the sixth age, which is the age of the Demon Emperor. Specifically, the fifth age canonically happened after the courts collapsed, and then ultimately the spiritual enlightenment of all Hungry Dead diminished as a result of it because the world is growing more grim, it's growing more boring, it's growing more mundane.
Hmm.
And specifically in Modern Nights, the most powerful Devil King, um, Mikaboshi, or the Lord of the Wicked City, is specifically a Devil King that rules over the sinners of people who either overworked others or who died of overwork. And specifically, that kind of capitalist hell is specifically that kind of he's winning in Modern Nights. So
Hmm.
specifically that kind of flow of time. If you're an Akuma, you can potentially try to move it forwards. That way your Devil King can end up on top. Or if you're not, you can try to prevent it and push it back to the golden ages of the earlier first ages before the Hungry Dead were damned into their current state. Because they used to be immortals under the servants of heaven until they orchestrated a massive war between the shapeshifters for really giggles on their own, and then the greater god over the setting, the August personage, ultimately decided, you know what, you're all going to be vampires now because obviously you can't be trusted. But then specifically every other major hegemony title will have an associated main objective, like specifically in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Nusantara, um, there will be a goal to unite it because specifically there will be a lot of Akuma there.
Hmm.
The Scarlet Phoenix court has basically fallen apart because its leader, Diang, basically kind of stepped away from everything to focus on her enlightenment, so it fell to chaos. And specifically, in canon, a conqueror named Piao specifically ends up leading a matriarchal violence hedonist cult that ends up taking over quite a lot. However, they end up becoming the Akuma's greatest enemies and then invent flesh shintai, which is the Hungry Dead arts of flesh shaping that they use to become classic Penanggalan. That is one example of what we plan. And Japan is obviously there's a lot of actually native kindred there. So specifically, Japan will be a balance between the native Hungry
Mm.
Dead and the native kindred. And then in the steppes, it's obviously forcing out the Anda. In Tibet, it's bringing back the court that fell apart. In India, it is which Orthodox group comes on top or which heretical group, or do the Ravnos win? Because that's entirely possible because Chandraputra, the leader of the Ravnos, is a wall who refuses to break.
Hmm.
And then there will be China will start out unified, but notice how I say start out because we have events to throw things into havoc because in canon, the leader of the main Chinese court ended up dying without any known cause. It's believed he was assassinated, but that's not quite clear, and it fell into chaos.
Hmm.
We
Jeez.
have representations for that, and then of course the big goal is eventually reforming or forming what will the August courts, but then forming an organization called the Quincunx, which is specifically kind of Asia's Camarilla,
Hmm.
and specifically that is the greater body of the Hungry Dead. Forming that group will be the main objective that will be guiding
Hmm.
the political side of the Hungry Dead, and then the spiritual side is, of course, preventing the Demon Emperor from rising.
Oh my god, that's what I was gonna ask. So with this threat of the demon emperor, the demon king, so are the kindred in not only in Asia but beyond it? Are they worried about this? Is this something that they are trying to prevent too?
For the most part, outside of East Asia, the Demon Emperor is not necessarily a known thing because the Wheel of Ages isn't really known
Mm.
to really any other supernaturals. Changelings have an idea of it with Banality because Banality and the Wheel of Ages are closely tied together.
Okay.
Although, however, there is a spiritual barrier set up by someone in setting, it's not clear who, that kind of divides the spiritual world of East Asia from the rest of the world. And because of that, it's kind of kept the Thousand Hells a bit more contained and
Mm.
mysterious. But then for the supernaturals that live in East Asia, that are surrounded by it, that are forced to see these devils coming out of hell on a regular basis, it's specifically a case of they are more aware of it. Specifically for outside the Hungry Dead, the native shapeshifters, which are just regular shapeshifters, they just have their own political structure. They are actively fighting against it. The native Fae do the same. Mages kind of do whatever they want. And then the kindred, because kindred aren't spiritual creatures, it's kind of harder for them to see. But specifically, there will be a native Nosferatu bloodline in
Oh yeah.
Indonesia of Nosferatu who do not have potence but have necromancy, and instead of being hideous, they look ghostly.
Ugh.
They are more aware of it and what's coming, so they are naturally trying to use the dead to prevent it. And then on the flip side, in Japan, three lineages of vampires under a single founder, a 6,000-year-old Zamishi who specifically was embraced by the native Zamishi that are in Sri Lanka. Specifically, she perfectly signed on with Mikaboshi, wanted to become his greatest disciple. So there is now an infernalist cult of Japanese Zamishi that are working to bring about Mikaboshi's ultimate hell. And they've actually specifically abducted one of the Tremere expeditions that went east, so that way they can get their hands on gargoyles as well.
Oh my god. I mean, both of those sound really cool. I am a huge Nosferatu fan, which I feel like is probably known by the channel and maybe by the devs. I'm a big fan of them. So hearing that there's a ghostly necromantic Nosferatu tickles me tremendously.
Yes, specifically, there was actually an offhand mention of native Nosferatu in Indonesia. So specifically, when I was designing them, because I'm actually the main person who was designing those
Mm-hmm.
bloodlines, I decided to tie it into the White Lady myths, which is those myths of those myths where you're by a lake or a river and suddenly it gets misty and then you
Mm-hmm.
see a ghostly woman there kind of looming ominously over things. We've decided to connect that into Kuntilanak folklore, which is specifically an Indonesian version of the White Lady. So specifically, they're a representation of that ghostliness. So that's why we decided, okay, instead of being ugly, they look ghostly and they inflict the wraith's delirium on mortals, which is kind of like or it's called the fog. It basically it makes mortals terrified of them, kind of like it makes sense in those myths, and they look ghostly because they've since taken up necromancy and become quite good at it.
Oh man, that sounds like it's going to be a treat. I'm looking forward to that. And then just because you are the portrait artist, like how I would assume that you've been having to do a lot for a lot of these new
Yes.
characters. Um, do you have any? I mean, I don't know how much you're allowed to talk about like the newer characters, but do you have any that you're looking forward to that you've made specifically, or just like in general, like swaths of them maybe that you're proud of so far?
Absolutely. Several definitely come to mind, and because I've designed all of them, it's I actually have total prerogative on what I want to share, so I can actually gush about them all I want. Two that are my favorite are the balance of power between Kageseo, which Kageseo is Mikaboshi's strongest cultist, that 6,000-year-old Zamishi that wanted to bring about his capitalist hell and usher in the Sixth Age with him as the Demon Emperor. Kageseo is that ancient Zamishi, a horrifyingly powerful Methuselah who advanced her generation with infernalism and has since founded three bloodlines dedicated to her cult and then abducted a Tremere expedition and then since brought gargoyle creation, which is his own horrifying monstrosity, into the mix,
Mm-hmm.
and to the point where her ideal world is imagine a techno futurist cyberpunk dystopia mixed with all the flesh crafting and infernalist horrors that can come with the Zamishi. So specifically, her fortress, the Wicked Citadel, imagine something out of Scorn. That is Kagaseo's utopia. That is what she wishes for.
Ugh.
And her main kindred rival is a warrior named Miyako, the founder of that Japanese bloodline from that Vancouver by Night of a group called the Bushi. Specifically, in their original incarnation, the Bushi were just basically samurai vampires obsessed with honor. That was their shtick. I decided to flesh them out further, so I decided to make Miyako a caitiff who was embraced by the Stone Man, and ultimately decided I was abandoned in life, I am alone in death, I will not allow anyone else to suffer like I have. So Miyako is specifically we use one of our scar textures because she was embraced after she had her head pushed into a brazier by some soldiers because the culture she was a part of, she was actually from the Susanoo worshipping people that were conquered by the Yamato, and ultimately she watched her civilization die. She watched her mindset be destroyed. So the Bushi, rather than just being honor obsessed samurai vampires, are mainly anarch ronin who are actively fighting against the tyrannies of the native kindred and hungry dead of Japan, specifically seeking out a revolution of a night world with no gods and no masters. And Miyako is the highest prowess character of the Kindred that are being added in East Asia, because she is a master swordsman with her own special discipline, Kai, which is focused on being the best duelist and suppressing the beast in Kindred blood
Hmm.
with raw willpower and grit. And specifically, those two will start out as nemesises. Miyako will be an Amakusa. Um, Kagesayo will be in what will become Sapporo, and their fight will definitely define how the Bushi and the Zanishi bloodlines, the Chibo Monomi and Kishu interact. And specifically, there is a third party, Asuka, which is specifically a seventh son of a Japanese emperor who was embraced by a what is revealed to be a Ravnos Methuselah, the single son of Ravana, who later became a Devil King. Although Asuka went his own way, he decided to master the art of turning illusion shaping into nightmare shaping.
Oh boy.
And specifically, what he wants the throne he felt he was denied in life. So where Mayako is an idealist, Kageseo is an infernalist, Asuka is equally scary by being a politician.
Oh my goodness. That sounds that's I mean that sounds wonderful. That's really really cool. So I have a note here, and I wanted to ask about this before I forget because there's a couple other things. So there's something regarding the reputation of the Kindred of the East. So what does that mean? Why did you want to talk about that specifically?
Yes, I specifically put that in because when talking about Kindred of the East within the World of Darkness community, it is a joke that it hasn't aged the best because it was written in the 90s by a mostly American crowd who didn't have the greatest access to research. So it hasn't aged well. It has made several really weird claims. Um, and while it's still a popular supplement, it does have this. It has a reputation for the rightly. It is deserved of a romanticizing Orientalist mindset, and
Oh.
specifically, that is something that we've had to address, specifically with adapting it. So, with Princes of Darkness and how we are trying to adapt this without making it into the same thing, because we can do better now. We have far more access to research, we have better access to testimonies. Specifically, we have contacted with several East Asian players and specifically been using them as cultural consultants. And specifically also contacted with an amazing third party supplement called The Relentless Age, which was written by an East Asian author, specifically adapting The Hungry Dead and specifically in a way that celebrates their origins without it having those Orientalist hangups. So, specifically, in adapting The Hungry Dead, there is inevitably, like, the term Quasian that is used in modernity is actually a portmanteau of a Chinese and Japanese word slammed together, which that's why I've been referring to them with Wong Kui, which is strictly a Chinese term,
Mhm.
or Hungry Dead, which is a universal term, specifically because that is one of our focuses of avoiding those same mistakes that White Wolf made in the past. And it was a product of its time, but they were trying to at least have something that celebrated it.
Mhm.
And while the execution fluffed it a little bit, we want to stick the landing with what we're doing. So that's why we've contacted with several consultants, not just Chinese consultants, but also Korean, Japanese. I've also personally talked to several Vietnamese people as well. I'm specifically reaching out to other Filipino, to an Ainu friend of mine, specifically to make sure that when we do this, we do it right. While we still want to have fidelity to the setting, we don't want to make those same mistakes that White Wolf made in the past with their limited resources, but also with the knowledge that we have now and the resources that we have now, because we want to do this right and we want to do this proper.
Hmm. No, I think that's a wonderful noble, and I was kind of wondering if that might be it because I know from at least from ModCon, with the talks from that a lot of these books are pretty old. I don't know how often the setting has been revisited within the tabletop sense, so that makes sense.
Yeah, more or less the setting hasn't been touched on for a while because realistically, it's probably because it is a minefield to touch up on, which is why we contacted that third party developer, Hissen Fan, that they go by, specifically because they actually have a 20th edition update that specifically addresses a lot of those issues. But then also, it is something of a joke that the Quasian don't exist. They're a LARP group out of LA that are smashing together Asian concepts. Like that is a joke that the Hunter the Parenting series definitely rightly made. And then
Mhm.
of course from how they appeared in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, everything regarding Chinatown, you could tell it
Yeah.
showed its age.
Yeah.
But specifically, we want to avoid that, and specifically because like specifically with writing characters, I never wrote a Japanese character or a Chinese character because like specifically like using Miyako for an example, she came from a bloodline that was basically just samurai vampires. So that's why I specifically wrote Miyako as a proto anarch first and then made her fit like how that came about. Like she's from one of the Susanoo following people, and then she later embraces Emishi people specifically because of how the Emishi were then later conquered by the Yamato. Specifically embracing those elements without making it the central element.
Mm. Okay. All right. Awesome. So something this is a question that I had from like a minute ago. So I was talking about a lot of great characters. A lot of the time when I play this mod, I like to play as vampire hunters. Are there going to be any of those wandering about in East Asia? I would assume so, or like people hunting these various creatures of the night.
Yes, there is actually a dedicated there's several dedicated arts to it. We have an homage to them, but then later in modernity there is Strike Force Zero, which is actually a governmental branch of Japan specifically to hunting supernaturals that's later corrupted by Mikaboshi. But then the main ones are the demon hunters, also known as Shi. The demon hunters are specifically more lone wolf hunters. They have an option of potentially banding together and creating a heavenly army to strike down the wicked supernaturals. But the demon hunters are significantly more. I think the best way to describe it is they're more chill, as they are able to recognize what is a good supernatural and what is a bad supernatural and judge accordingly. However, they do also have their own unique soul arts because their original founders did have those other similar arts and means. And specifically, hunters are not our primary focus, as we want to make sure that we can at least have the first bookmark completely filled.
Right.
But I actually already have written several characters that easily become hunters, like specifically one hunter that specifically is in homage to Filipino comics with Trace is specifically Adhika is her name, specifically a Dampier hunter who is specifically later founds a lineage of demon hunters that then later balance out the native kindred gangrel of the Philippines and the hungry dead that influence it, the Mananganal. Between the on gangrel and the hungry dead Mananganal, those hunters end up becoming the balancing force in the Philippines until the later descendants of that Tremere expedition create their own blood cult there. That Hunter the Reckoning Fifth Edition talks about the lords of the, I think it was the Mangana River or the Hari that later come to threaten the Philippines. The demon hunters are their primary threat, and demon hunters have also gotten an overhaul. And then specifically, like I said, they're hunters that have more interactions with supernaturals. So specifically, if you want to be a hunter that can at least say, okay, you're a good vampire, I won't destroy you, the demon hunters are those vampires. Whereas Okamoto's hunters, who will later become Strike Force Zero, are the more classical hunter. It's a bloodsucker, it dies hunter.
Okay. Oh, I mean, that sounds really interesting. At least from from the perspective of somebody who typically, I'll either play as a vampire hunter or like a Nosferatu, just because I think those are like the ones that appeal to me, or like a Malkavian. I'm a big fan of those too. But I did notice, and I think this was also mentioned in ModCon, but it looks like you guys are collaborating with the Relentless Age, which is isn't that a fan? Is that a fan written like supplement to Kindred of the East or
Um,
no?
to explain it, I've called it third party before
Third
because
party.
specifically it was written and published through the Dark Pack, through the Storyteller's Vault. Think of it like DM's Guild for D&D or Pathfinder Infinite for Pathfinder.
Oh, okay.
The Storyteller's Vault is specifically the World of Darkness has a more open license, so it's more friendly to third party developers. The Relentless Age was the highest quality Kindred of the East update that there was. It was incredibly well researched. The mechanics are great. So specifically, we have collaborated with them to help fill out, make connecting tissue, and specifically one of like several of the major collaborations are specifically in minor characters, Spice of Life, Salt and Pepper. But then actually there is a Relentless Age character that we are hoping that we will be able to bookmark with the Blood and Silk update. Her name is Mahailan. Specifically, she is the master of a group called the Heaven and Hell Legion. And specifically, when the Relentless Age presents the Quincunx's eventual collapse as a result of overreaching, letting the Akuma go wild, and then eventually mortal affairs and the changing pace of China later destroys it, Mahailan is the one primed to restore it. And specifically, in order to make her stand out, because she didn't have any portrait information, I have made her a one-eyed, white-haired, with a piercing green eye commander with a close cabal of friends, specifically to the idea of this is the young conqueror. And specifically for a China playthrough, Mahailan is going to be my first recommendation every single time, because she is primed to be at the epicenter of basically everything in Blood and Silk. She will be at the forefront of the Anda invasion into China. She will be there for the collapse of the central Chinese courts. She will be at the maelstrom of the formation of the Quincunx, and then eventually in the fight in the Wheel of Ages against the Demon Emperor. She will be there front and center throughout, and she's an easy recommendation. And I love how she was written in the Relentless Age, hence why I kind of pushed to make her a central character here.
No, that's a great recommendation. That sounds really sick. Also, I think a character that sort of, it sounds like she's going to explore a lot of different mechanics too within the expansion and the new update. So that's wonderful. I love to hear it personally.
Absolutely, I could compare her to the Hungry Dead LeSithia the Aragon, the one who will probably have the most content of the bunch, because she'll not only have bookmark content, she'll deal with the Anda invasion, she's involved in the Wheel of Ages, she's involved with local China decisions, she's close to the steps so she can do those decisions, and then of course forming the Quincunx, and then she'll be in a lot. So that's why she'll be an easy recommend for me.
Awesome. So with being the portrait artist, this is something that I was thinking of. So with that, do you have to like make any models outside of Crusader Kings 3? Like, are you using like Blender or anything to like make additional things to put into the mod? Like, how does that work? Because you were talking about how the Nosferatu have this sort of ghostly feature. Are you the one that's implementing those changes or like creating those looks?
For new models, that is mainly Spark. He's actually currently working on a Penanggalan model right now, which for those unaware, that one. Which for the viewers unaware, Penanggalans are a folkloric creature in Southeast Asia that specifically are known for being able to detach themselves from their body with their head, and then the rest of their body is a trail of organs, and that's actually represented in the World of Darkness with Flesh and Tie. So he's been making that model. And then as far as the shaders for the ghostly Nosferatu, shaders are D's happy place. D probably one of our D's done. Obviously, D did fiefdom, so D is a wizard with that. But shaders are his happy place, so he specifically applied the ghostly filter for the Kuntilanak, specifically for that. And then as far as the portrait art stuff goes, I have actually been experimenting with Blender on making hairs. I'm not making East Asia hairs, but specifically because we're probably bound to get new ones in the upcoming updates. So specifically, I've been focusing on instead making African hairstyles, because one other thing people like to forget under Heaven is that the Swahili coast is being expanded, and I do actually have big plans for there as well. So specifically, I have been working on learning Blender specifically for those hairstyles. I'm still learning it, haven't broken through entirely yet, but I am focused on getting that done. And then once I make several African hairstyles, I'll probably branch out, because they're probably not going to get anything for a long while at best. So specifically, it's less of a risk. And then once All Under Heaven, I might make more, because as a portrait artist, naturally, I'm quite picky with what is added, because I think with All Under Heaven, probably once it's released, I'll have made 700 portraits for Princes of Darkness.
Jeez.
Specifically, hairstyles are always the thing I'm looking for more of. So specifically, that is why I'm going in there
Hmm.
with that in mind.
Wow. Okay. All right. That's really cool. So with the Swahili Coast, what I guess I have two questions. Why is it being expanded? Does it play a major role in the Kindred of the East lore, or like in East Asia in general, or is it just something that the team has been wanting to do?
More than anything, it was actually more of a personal thing
Hmm.
because All Under Heaven is expanding the Swahili coast. There is going to be more land there. So specifically, as we use the same map, we would eventually have to expand vampires there as well. The thing is that the native empires of Africa, the Liban, specifically, they are kindred, they are Canaanites, but however, they have a slightly different morality system that is a twist on the humanity system that vampires typically use. Although, however, they kind of got left in the dust, although through searching through books, because I didn't want the Swahili coast to just be forgotten about. All too often, Africa is simply put a footnote, and I didn't want it to be a footnote. I actually found that Mombasa actually has a dedicated section in World of Darkness Second Edition, and specifically, my hopes there is that I can adapt that there to make sure Africa isn't just forgotten about.
Hmm.
That can potentially segue into a Liban rework, taking stuff from the same book, A World of Darkness Second Edition, as it has an Africa section, but then also from Becca's Jihad Diary, one of the last books of Vampire the Masquerade 20th edition, with a lot of plot hooks and things that weren't necessarily expanded. And the Dark Ages Companion, which expands Mogadishu. Mogadishu is on the end of the map right now, although it will be pretty central in what's coming up. So specifically with Mombasa, I have created a area called the Domain of Iron, which will later then turn into Mombasa's modern political situation of a divide between two political groups, the Nyayo and the Lao, and specifically are their reactions to how do the native vampires of Africa deal with foreign interference. The Nyayo are more so just keep them out, but then once they're here, we're all in this together, and the Lao are like, no, throw them out by any means necessary. But the domain of iron will specifically be a diarchy between a Liban Kaidif and a Setite that has broken away from the road of Set and hates the mainline Orthodox Setites, specifically for what I want to be an empire in Africa with an interesting diarch situation, and then struggling to deal with the influence of Ashura, which are the Muslim vampire sect, and the Setites, which are trying to evolve themselves because the central theme of Mombasa in World of Dark Second Edition is the influence of outside powers. Obviously, Europe at this time wasn't messing with Africa beyond the Sahara really much at all at this point in history, so I decided to instead keep that theme, but make it make sense with it being the Setites and Ashira instead.
Okay. All right. No, I think that's a really wonderful goal anyway, because I think Africa in general is incredibly underdeveloped, and even just in base CK3. So to give it more for people that want to play down there, I think is great. And plus, if it's getting expanded anyway, which I guess I didn't think about, but that makes sense. That's wonderful, and we've basically covered pretty much everything that I had written, and then some. You've certainly given people a lot to chew on. Is there anything that you're working on right now as far as the update goes that you just like really want to talk about, that you just really want people to be like, you should be excited about this? Or is there anything coming besides like fiefdoms? Because obviously I talked about that a little bit like a week ago. And maybe I'll talk to D if I find the time. But is there anything that you're like, this update is already it's real, I'm really hyped for it. I think a lot of people are. Is there anything that you're like, you should be even more excited about?
There are several things that actually come to mind that I haven't discussed further. Is that one of our devs, Purple Pineapple, is currently doing a total rework and overhaul on the Farah, which are specifically the general shapeshifters. And specifically, she is also working on Mokale stuff. So the were reptiles are probably sooner than a lot of people realize. And specifically with that upcoming, that it's about to be a big rework, but also with new content as well. Specifically, it will be an overhaul for the shapeshifters, and that's specifically something that is going to be fun looking forward to. Specifically, the spirit quests have been overworked, their progression system has been retooled, and then, like I said, the Mokale are coming. And then Vexen, another one of our developers, is currently doing the Hungry Dead rework, and that will be available sooner because a lot of this stuff it's a lot of prep work because like with characters we can put them in existing trees, and we're using the Han culture as a placeholder now. So you'll actually be seeing a lot of this stuff with Crusader Kings 3 updates as well because we'll update at the same time. You'll then see what we have done then, or of course our patrons get access to it early. But
Mhm.
then the Pharaoh rework is probably going to be a really big one. And then, of course, D is still actively working on fiefdoms. But then, otherwise, the other things that come to mind is you can actually, once this update comes, you'll be able to see the founders of the 8 native bloodlines to East Asia for the native kindred past Bangladesh. I mentioned the Kutilanak Nosferatu, the Kaidif Bushi, the Ravnos Kizoku is the Asuka. That's the bloodline he leads with his own unique brand of nightmare discipline. And then the Zamishi are split into 3 distinct bloodlines with their own powers. The Chibo sages, the Kishu assassins, and the Monomi guardians. And then I mentioned the On, which are gangrel in the Philippines that are native there. They're a kind of mariner. They specifically like fighting were sharks. Also trying to they like trying to vie for control over the Philippines. And then there will also be the Bear Lords of Korea, which are a Ventru bloodline that their curse twisted, and instead of having a rarefied palate, they are incredibly shy. So they have protean, specifically so they can take animal shapes and be the lords of the mountains that they are not necessarily well known by, but however, they are still lords. With their instead of having the feeding restrictions, they cannot lose the shy personality trait.
Oh, that's a really interesting. I would love a little shy bear guy. That's fun.
Yep. And then the other big things is that the Onda have also been expanded because within the Blood and Silk game book, that's what we're naming the update after, the central threat is the Onda, which are the Mongolian vampires. They have since been expanded. We've given them more characters, more to work with.
Mhm.
And they will be kind of, if you're playing a Hungry Dead in the steppes, in Tibet, in China, the Onda will be your big bad at the start of the game right there because we've actually been doing some experimenting with the leader of the Onda, Shinkai. We have given him the Conqueror trait.
Oh boy.
That makes him significantly scarier earlier on. But then whether or not the Onda can be stopped will be a core early loop to that. So specifically, we have in expanding the Onda. Like I said, we hope to be expanding the Libon soon. That's actually my personal project. That's what I'm working on. I'm actually specifically thinking of doing an overhaul for Africa's Landing, specifically with that coming in mind to make it an interesting region to play in. And then thinking what else is coming. Like I said, Spark's working on new character models. Card has, of course, been focused on the foundation of the prep work for East Asia. We have new artifacts, a new face, all that good stuff. And then beyond that, like I said, it's I'm currently writing out characters at the moment, but
Hmm.
then eventually, like I said, I hope to make a situation where because obviously Prince of Darkness is a bit unique in that we try to make so that way because like obviously yeah most people are going to want to play custom characters although with the special content we have for bookmark characters that we had before a lot of other mods did but then also it's often understated how important it has to have interesting foreign rulers in interesting vassals. So specifically, even if you're to custom ruler replace Mahailan, like I still want the vassal setup for that region to be interesting. So specifically, like we're putting a lot of focus in making sure that no matter where you play, you'll have an interesting story regardless, whether or not you're a custom ruler or not. But then that's always been our focus. And then, of course, fidelity to the setting. We're not just writing characters for our own self inserts. We're not trying to make the same characters our patrons like making. Rather we want to make characters that fit in with the setting, that feel like they belong there, that feel as if they could be in an official White Wolf book. That is the core focus of all our character writing is we want to maintain that feel of the world of darkness. We want to maintain its integrity. We want it to still feel like WAD. We we want to keep it Princes of Darkness. We don't want to make it we don't want to make it Underworld more or less.
Hmm. No, I think that's a wonderful goal. And honestly, it surprises me that you said most people are going to play custom characters because I don't think I've ever played a custom character in Princes of Darkness, only because there's so much great story content or like decision trees within so many characters. I've had, and I cannot remember their name at the moment, but there's one of the vampires. He's like trying to seek absolution. He's trying to go see the Pope. I think he was like a priest in the 8th century. Starts with a C. Anyway, I've been wanting to make a video out of them, but I know that their event chain is super long, so I've been trying to like block out time for that. But it's just there's so many great characters, and I try to tell people this all the time that have a ton that they can do, even if they don't maybe move around too much. It's just I don't know. Personally, if anybody was wondering, I would recommend trying out all these new characters. Obviously, because you've been working on them, but just because they're generally really good. So that's my.
And when East Asia comes, all the Kindred bloodline founders and several other important Hungry Dead will have special content. So specifically, I think we're planning on 16 characters at the moment
Mhm.
being bookmarked. And specifically, like Mahailan is going to be one of them, but then also Piao, who later conquers most of Southeast Asia, will be one with her matriarchal violence hedonism cult. But then also several other important characters throughout. Just do note that the Emperor of China probably or isn't long for this world in the night. But then otherwise, though, we are looking forward to what we have to present. And while vampires are the focus, other splats have not been forgotten. Like I said, Mokale are in the pipeline. Farah have been reworked. Wraiths also have had some touching up. And then also specifically, there is the stinger that Z left with ModCon that Mage is receiving attention. It will be here when it's here.
Right.
We don't have a time frame on it because obviously when you can make anything happen, that's kind of hard to equate in a video game. But these are not forgotten. We have a lot of things coming up and planned. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Like even with all the character writing I've done, like it has kind of become an all hands on deck thing where a lot of stuff is going on, and I'm really excited for what it is to come and to actually be able to play some of these myself once the landing is available.
No, I think I'm very much excited for it, and I hope that I wish the team, I wish everybody nothing but the best, and I really appreciate you, LeSithia, for coming on here and talking to me personally today a little bit more about it. I know ModCon was just a couple weeks ago, and obviously you had a chance to chat, but I had to skip it, so I'm glad that you took the time to let me. Flex these little chat muscles, and then just like let people know maybe a little bit more in depth than they were able to during the presentation. But I think that is all that I have for you. So again, thank you for so much for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we part?
Thank you absolutely for having me. I love doing things like this. And then also, one other small thing is that specifically, so that way we can be a little bit more forward with the issues regarding Steam in the Workshop. We are hoping that in the future, you mentioned in your last video on Prince of Darkness that we had a YouTube channel. I'm actually going to start recording monthly dev diaries soon, so that way we can actually show off more of what we're working on past just our Discord. Patrons always have early access, of course, through our GitHub channel, but then otherwise, specifically so we can show the community, because we only update with Paradox updates specifically, so that way we don't interrupt saves. But then otherwise, we are planning on putting out those dev diaries so we can show off what we are working on a more consistent basis. So you can be looking forward to that soon on the turn of the month, where I will specifically record a dev diary with a more in-depth showing off of what we have made so far, and specifically that will be new. And then I'm happy to say that is a new thing that we will be doing for that community outreach.
Awesome, that's wonderful. I think people will really like that. Plus, I think it's just good if more mod teams are more, I don't know, conversation about what they're doing. People always want to know, and it saves you the time on the Discord or wherever you happen to communicate with people asking a million questions. They can just find out on in the little dev diaries, which is good. But all right, thank you, LeSithia. This has been wonderful, and I will happily chat with you whenever we chat again.
Always happy to be here. Hope you
Yeah,
have a good rest of your evening.
you as well.